Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're just letting a few more people have a few moments to log on. We don't want anybody to miss this exciting webinar we have this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. This is, of course, Douglas Laboratories Peer Encapsulations Educational Webinar Series. We're thrilled today to have Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed join us and teach us that fight or flight fat trap. I'm Dr. Victoria Coleman. I'm the president of Douglas Labs Canada and Pure Encapsulations. And again, welcome. We're really pleased to have you join us this afternoon. I think we're just about ready to get started. We have Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed set up. You should be able to see her slide presentation on your screens to follow along. So I think we should probably begin our webinar. Everybody has tight schedules, and we do appreciate you taking the time for education this afternoon. So again, the topic today is the fight or flight fat trap, why our brain plays a larger role in our waistline than our food does. And our renowned speaker this afternoon is Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed. Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed is a naturopathic doctor in Toronto. After graduating from McGill University with her BSc in neurobiology, she attended the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. Here she earned her degree in naturopathic medicine in 1997 and received the Dr. Alan Tyler Award for Most Outstanding Clinician. As a specialist in metabolic disorders and the author of a national bestseller, The Naturopathic Diet, and co-author of the books The No Crave Diet, Healing Arthritis, The Complete Doctor's Healthy Back Bible, and The Complete Doctor's Stress Solution, Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed travels throughout Canada and the United States, lecturing on metabolic and endocrine diseases, holds health retreats and lectures at various resorts worldwide, and appears regularly on television, magazine, radio across North America, addressing various health issues. Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed is the Director of Natural Therapies at the Urban Wellness Clinic in Toronto. We're really pleased to have an expert in the topic that she'll be discussing this afternoon. I think you'll find this extremely helpful with many takeaways to apply to your patients. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed and turn the webinar over to her. Dr. Penny?
Thank you very much, Victoria, and thank you for that intro. The scary part was the year I actually graduated. It's really going to age me there. I'd like to just begin by thanking everybody taking time out of their busy day today. I certainly know what it means to fit this in between patients, so I really hope that you can take home some great information from this. I will just get right into it so that we don't waste any time. Every time I walk into a bookstore, there is the newest, latest, and greatest weight loss book to hit the shelf. And many of these are filled with really clinically sound diets and programs, and yet still our waistlines are expanding each and every year. And as practitioners, we've all seen it, those patients who are eating really well, they're exercising more than ever, and they can't seem to lose that weight, especially the muffin top around the waist. And the reason is because today, more so than ever before, weight loss has less to do with our food and more to do with our brain, stress, and the effect on the nervous system. Stress has actually become so prominent in our society that it's almost considered normal. In fact, you're looked upon as lazy if you're not stressed. What do you mean you didn't work over the weekend or you shut your computer off at 7 p.m. last night? But what people don't realize is the impact of so-called normal stress is having on our health. 79 to 90% of all visits to primary health care practitioners in North America are due to stress-related disorders. Could you imagine if we could eradicate almost 90% of visits? 1 million North Americans are absent on any workday due to stress, and this is costing our employers $3.5 billion each year. Could you imagine, again, what we could do with that money, putting it into research, putting it into healthcare? And unfortunately, it's not just affecting adults. 45% of teens and 26% of tweens are reported being anxious every single day. Can you imagine what will happen to those teenagers when they become adults? What's even scarier, though, is that 25% of all prescriptions written in North America are due to stress. They're either tranquilizers, antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, or sleeping medications. And if you think about how many meds are written every day for birth control pill, hypertensives, hormone replacement therapy, antibiotics, still 25% accounts for those relating to stress. There's a really great report that was released a couple of years ago showing that there was a 700% increase in workers' compensation claims in the mid-'80s, and that was when the markets were crashing. And unfortunately, despite the fact that the markets haven't crashed that significantly since then, these numbers are still growing every single year. So what impact is this having on our weight? Well, 65% of North Americans are overweight. 31% are clinically obese. 6.8% are morbidly obese. And once again, it's not just adults. 26% of kids aged 2 to 17 are overweight. And there was a really great study that was released. It was a 2-year study where they took 2,800 working adults, and they put them through a wellness program, and they divided them into 3 groups. One of them, a third of the people got dietary wellness programs, one got exercise wellness programs, and one got a stress management program. The group that lost and kept off the most weight was actually the stress management group, not the group exercising and not the group with the dietary changes. So if right there, that doesn't begin us off by telling us that our brain actually has, and stress has more to do with our weight than our food, I don't know what does. Biological set points. It's been shown that our brain, or rather our hypothalamus, has a genetic code for a biological set point that controls our incoming and outgoing energy, or our metabolism. This is unique to each person, and it's partially what accounts for the individual variability in responses to different diets and exercise programs. However, new research shows us that this point isn't fixed, and we can actually adversely affect or slow down this set point. Obese individuals, specifically those who have consumed high fats and sugars in the past, have structural changes to their hypothalamic nuclei. What they didn't know was whether it was the food alone that caused the weight gain, or the subsequent changes in the hypothalamus, or was it both. And the research shows that increased stress and the resulting elevated HPA activity alone greatly altered the hypothalamus independent of diet. A more profound effect was seen, of course, when they combined it with increased fats and sugars, but what they saw was a reduction in the rate of cellular turnover in the hypothalamic cells and a slowing of the neural pathways involved in both energy balance and metabolic rates. So essentially, it was the stress-induced alterations that slowed the biological set points down and had a much greater influence on weight than the food did. This certainly doesn't bode well for the future of those 79 to 90% of people running to their doctors. Stress and DNA methylation. This actually could be a whole lecture in itself, so I'm only going to touch upon it briefly as just another example as how stress affects our body and our weight. DNA methylation is a crucial part of normal cellular development and differentiation, and acute stress is really well known to alter this process. Research has shown us that stress greatly inhibits or downregulates the methylation of the glucocorticoid receptors in young infants and animals who receive less nurturing from their mothers. What this resulted in was a great increase in fear and emotional instability. However, the long-term consequence of this was general anxiety disorder and abnormal glucocorticoid release to any acute stressor later on in life. And recently, this was actually just put to the test. There was a group of 76, a scientist took a group of 76 individuals, and they placed them under a fictitious job, fictitious stressors. They were job interviews or mathematical problems to solve in a short period of time, that sort of thing. And they looked, is also known as our anti-stress gene or our trust gene, and BDNF. They took serum samples and they analyzed them before the stressors, at 10 minutes after, and 90 minutes after the given stressors. No change in the methylation of BDNF was seen. However, there was an initial increase in the methylation of the oxytocin gene at 10 minutes, followed by a significant reduction at 90 minutes. And at the same time, those people reported increased anxiety levels. So the study suggests that there's an overcompensation at the oxytocin gene following stress, much like the infants who received less nurturing from their mothers. We also know that methylation affects the weight directly. Another great study looked at 25 obese people who were following a really low-calorie diet at the time. And the researchers then analyzed the effects of methylation on promoter ATPA gene. Promoter ATPA plays a crucial role in lipid transport, phospholipid asymmetry, and body fat modulation. And what the study showed was that lower methylation rate at the site due to stress only significantly decreased the weight loss despite the fact that they were on a low-calorie diet. So once again, showing our brain has a bigger impact than our food. And the final study took a look at 27 obese women with chronic and consistently elevated cortisol levels, and they revealed that the stress lowered the methylation rates of leptin and TNF-alpha, greatly again reducing the weight loss even though they were on a low-calorie diet. So we can easily see how methylation is affected by stress and that affects our weight. Sleep deprivation. We all know the term you snooze, you lose. Well, science is actually giving this statement a new meaning. Sleeping just 1 hour less per night, meaning 7 hours versus 8, reduces melatonin production and stimulates cortisol secretion. Even slightly lowered melatonin levels greatly inhibit leptin, serotonin, and growth hormone, and they also increase ghrelin. And as we'll soon see, the same rise in cortisol also stimulates food cravings, stops fat burning, and reduces the conversion of white inflammatory fat into thermogenic fat. Studies have shown that when people are sleep deprived by just 1 hour, but those people are then supplemented with melatonin, not only does their metabolism normalize and weight loss occurs, but there's also an improvement in cholesterol profiling. And this occurs without any change in diet or exercise. And there's great studies that show that when teenagers who sleep 7 hours versus 6 hours a night, independent of how many catch-up hours they play on the weekend, their insulin levels or insulin resistance is improved by 9%. I mean, what a great way to lose weight and prevent diabetes. Let's just sleep. A really powerful study was actually done on rats where they removed the pineal glands of the rats, and so there was an immediate halting of the melatonin production. But what they also saw was an immediate and significant rise in weight, independent of the type of food that was consumed. Then they supplemented these rats with melatonin, and the reverse occurred. So the weight loss ensued right away, even though they didn't change their diet. Then they did a second part to the limited fat and sugar content to their diet, and still with the melatonin supplementation, weight loss occurred. Ghrelin and dopamine. Stress greatly affects a variety of hormones and neurotransmitters, and ghrelin and dopamine are certainly two of them. Ghrelin is a hormone that's produced in our stomach, and it stimulates hunger when our food stores are low. The ghrelin receptors, but specifically here the GSH-R1 alphas, they're plentiful in the brain, but yet the concentration of ghrelin itself is almost undetectable. So how is it that appetite suppression takes place with this then? Well, it occurs through a subset of neurons that express both ghrelin and dopamine simultaneously. And here the dopamine receptors are the DRD2 type. And stress hormones, cortisol in particular, they mutate this DRD2 receptor and therefore attenuate or reduce the calming effect that dopamine has on the brain. And it also prevents ghrelin from binding. Both of these effects greatly increase hunger, stress, and obesity. And research shows that when both of these receptors are allowed to function normally and bind their respective messengers, both appetite and weight are normalized, even when increased calories are offered. Similarly, drugs that increase dopamine, such as catecholamine, have the same effect. And this offers us as naturopaths great tools because there's so many different easy ways that we can increase dopamine levels in the body. And we're certainly going to need this because stress doesn't just inhibit the binding of dopamine, it also inhibits the production of dopamine. And dopamine is needed to decrease neuropeptide Y in the brain to decrease our food cravings and our hunger. Specifically, though, dopamine likes to inhibit cravings for fatty foods, things like cheese and nuts and chips and alcohol. Low dopamine is also associated with addictive behaviors such as gambling, alcohol, shopping, and sex, and of course the fatty foods. And, you know, we'll often see this when somebody gets through an addictive behavior such as alcoholism, but they do it through AA meetings or through sheer willpower. Applause is certainly warranted. But if it's done without affecting the dopamine levels, what you generally see is one addictive behavior quickly being switched to another one. And certainly fatty foods hold the most compelling draw, and they're available most readily. I'm overweight because of constant bullying. Last night I was bullied by a cheesecake. Today I'm bullied by a jelly donut. This is certainly the picture that we see of the low dopamine person. Cortisol also inhibits PGC1 alpha, and this is also known as human accelerated region 20. This is a co-activator that regulates the genes involved in energy metabolism. And it's produced in our muscle, especially when we exercise. PGC1 alpha will increase the expression of something called protein SMBC5, which quickly gets cleaved and then converted into irisin. And irisin is a hormone that's able to convert the white inflammatory fat into brown thermogenic fat. And until recently, we thought that the amount of brown fat that we had in our bodies was just what we were born with and slowly declined as we aged and was irreplaceable. But new research shows us that not only can we increase these brown fat stores through exercise, but there's also certain supplements that we can do that too. And in fact, injections of irisin into white fat cells of rats browned them immediately and had the same effect on the rats' bodies as if they had exercised and diet. So they had improved glucose tolerance, weight loss, a better cholesterol profile, and increased respiratory RRE rates, etc. And this was even shown when they overfed the rats. They still lost the weight as soon as the irisin was injected. So once again, this shows us that our brain and our chemical messaging system has a much more powerful impact on our weight than just the food there, and how cortisol can completely inhibit that process. Cortisol, if that wasn't bad enough, also blocks the release of leptin from our fat tissues. And again, leptin is released at the end of the meal. It goes up to the brain, and it stimulates alpha MSH to inhibit neuropeptide Y in the hypothalamus. And therefore, again, we inhibit the hunger and the food cravings. But leptin is also responsible for initiating the metabolic pathways and starting the fat-burning processes. By blocking leptin, our brain never gets that message of, I'm done. That's the tidy message. So we have this continual foraging for our food. If we do allow our body, if we do stop and allow our body to get into fat-burning mode, if leptin is blocked or at a lower level, we drop the rate of fat burning from 92% down to 35%. And again, we have these increased food cravings between our meals. Cortisol and CRH will also increase the rate of lipogenesis. Lipogenesis, again, is that formation of fat from food. So we get a disproportionate amount of our healthy or unhealthy fat stored as food, and less goes into our glycogen stores as an immediate fuel source. Cortisol also triples the release of insulin to all grains, starches, fruits, sweets, and alcohol. So what this means is when we have a patient who has an elevated cortisol or chronic cortisol secretion, they'll treat one piece of bread, even if it's organic, multigrain, spelt, chemistry, whatever, as 3 pieces of bread. 1 apple is 3 apples. 1 cookie is 3 cookies. And again, we've all seen it with our patients. They come in, they're like, I'm not eating very much, and they're eating healthy foods, but if they're in this category and the cortisol is up, they're going to treat it like 3 times that amount. All of our adipose tissue actually has receptors for cortisol, but the abdominal adipose tissues have 30% more receptors. And that's why we see the predominant weight gain when cortisol is involved around the abdominal area. So it's a good way to sort of look at our patients even before we do any blood and saliva testing to say, hey, I think we've got some stress issues going on here. So these are only some of the effects that stress has on our metabolism. I could be here for hours and hours talking about it, but we want to get on to what are we going to do about it. So when we're looking at this, we want to take a look at diet and supplements and massage and incorporate all the various routes that we have as naturopaths to use. The pill that they advertise on TV all the time, I'm not sure what it is, but I want it. Again, we all know as practitioners what's good for one person may not necessarily be good for the next person, and this is individuality is always key. Serenitine Plus. Serenitine Plus is a combination of lactium or tryptic decapeptide, which is an extract from milk, a green tea extract, C9, and some vitamin D. And a little bit of history on this one first. I've been using the lactium or the milk peptide with my patients for about 12 years with huge success. It is an incredible anti-anxiety supplement without any side effects. About 4 years into using it with my patients, the pharmaceutical world discovered how effective it was without any side effects and decided that they would sweep it and take it back from us and try to make a drug out of it so that they can make some money off of it. We all know, though, that they can't just patent a natural product, so they had to pharmaceutically change it in some way. And every time they tried to change it, it didn't work anymore. So they threw about three years after that, they threw it back out onto the market and said, free for all for anybody. By that time, though, the companies I was ordering from were in the U.S., and they were no longer making it because of that delay with a pharmaceutical company. So I approached Douglas Laboratories to help me source it out here and bottle it and encapsulate it. And I was using it just for myself with my patients and have been until probably about a year ago. And I had so many patients saying, where else can I get this? Or they were telling their friends because it's so effective that we've now made it available to everybody. And I certainly hope that you guys have the same success with it that I do. So what it is exactly is an extract from milk. It's a decapeptide, so a 10-protein sequence. And it has a specific binding affinity to the GABA receptor. So the GABA receptor has two different lengths on it. It has the A1, which is the calming side, the anti-anxiety side, and then the PBR site. And the PBR site is where all of the benzodiazepines also bind into, and that's the sedating, the groggy side. So the milk peptide that's in serotonin will only bind to the GABA A1 and have a calming effect. Without any side effects, there's no sedation and no grogginess. And in fact, this peptide has been shown to be 10 times more active than diazepam in vivo, not even in vitro. And again, no side effects because of that partial binding. The most important thing, though, that it does that I see is increases the sensitivity of the hypothalamus to the cortisol, So it reestablishes that feedback loop. We all know that in chronic stress, we lose that feedback, so we can't turn off the central nervous system from the sympathetic side to the parasympathetic side. And what serotonin or the lactium in it will do is rejuvenate the receptors around the hypothalamus and around the pituitary, allowing the patient's glucocorticoids, specifically cortisol, to bind back in and reestablish that negative feedback loop. And this is crucial because it's not good enough for us to just mop up cortisol. We can't do that because as soon as we take that supplement away, the cortisol just rises right up again. So we're just band-aiding that therapy. And although there is a time and a place for that, long-term what we need to do is teach that person's nervous system to go back to the parasympathetic side. And this is the only thing that I have seen discovered so far that will do that. And again, no side effects. Some great research that's been done on it. 42 male subjects. There was double-blind placebo-controlled study. They were given 200 milligrams of the peptide 3 times, 12 hours apart. So we're talking only 36 hours on this supplement. What they did is they induced stressors. They were hot and cold applications as well as flashcard games, so both a physical and an emotional stressor. And they looked at serum cortisol levels, blood pressure levels, and heart rate before and after. There was a significant reduction in blood pressure in the group that took the serotonin. Their blood pressure only increased 15 points versus 25, but a huge reduction in the serum cortisol. The serotonin group or lactium group, only their cortisol levels only raised by 3.39% versus the untreated group, which raised by 20.69. That's in 36 hours. So imagine what we can do again with our patients longer term. No change in heart rate, though, was seen between the two groups with this study. Another study was looking at sleep, and we did see prior in our lecture how stress affects sleep and melatonin production, but we also continually see it in our practices day in and day out. So this was a study that was done on 32 Japanese participants. They were aged 25 to 40, and they had all had bouts of insomnia for the last 6 months, ranging from difficulties falling asleep to staying asleep, to not going into stage 4 sleep, a variety of different things. Some of them were medicated and some of them were not. They used the Japanese Pittsburgh Sleep Index questionnaires as their stabilizer for the study. And this measures things, everything from sleep quality to quantity, duration, how their energy was the next day, their performance, their memory, looks at all different aspects that have to do with sleep. And they had the participants do the questionnaires before the study at 2 weeks and at 4 weeks. There was a significant change in all aspects of the sleep at 2 weeks, and at 4 weeks up to a 70% improvement in the group that took the lactium. And then with the placebo group, no change at all at 2 or 4 weeks. So that's huge. Again, just by lowering cortisol, we can improve people's sleep by 70%. And as we know in stage 4 sleep, that's where the true healing in the body takes place. So the next ingredient that's in the serotonin plus is theanine, which is an extract from green tea. And it crosses the blood-brain barrier and increases the alpha waves. And alpha waves, again, are those calming waves. There was a great study where they didn't induce any stressors. They just wanted to see the efficacy of theanine and how it worked with the alpha waves. So they gave people either a placebo, 50 milligrams of theanine, or 200. And then they hooked them up to an EEG. And 40 minutes later, there was a dose-dependent increase in the frequency of the alpha waves across both the parietal and the occipital lobe. So again, the 200 milligram group had 4 times the amount of increased alpha wave activity than the placebo had none. So just a great sign, again, showing its efficacy. Animal studies also suggest that theanine increases brain serotonin levels, dopamine, and GABA, so it has that nice calming effect on the body. and has an antagonistic effect on all the glutamate receptors, the AMPA, the kainite, the NMDA. So again, decreases the overstimulation. Some behavioral studies have shown, and this is just in animals, that it improves learning and memory. They didn't actually suggest as to why. I'm going to guess amygdala and hippocampal integration, because cortisol will block the neurotransmitters that bind into the hippocampus and decreasing our short-term memory, just as we see in ADD and ADHD. So if we can increase that alpha wave activity through there and increase neurotransmitter binding, we increase our learning. Some great studies on this one again, a small one, but a good one. 12 participants went through, there was four different groups. So one of the groups took C9 at the beginning of the study, one took it halfway through, one took a placebo, and the fourth group took nothing. And here they were looking at other factors that increase with stress. So we know that salivary IgA really increases in acute stress, and so does heart rate. What they used here was computer memory games, and again, hot and cold compresses. So they had both a physiological and an emotional or psychological stressor placed on them. Both the C9 groups had a significant reduction in their heart rate, as well as the salivary IgA, and the placebo had no change at all. Magnolia, certainly this is something that's been around for a long time, and most of us are probably well aware of it, and with good reason. Magnolia has a lot of different active ingredients, magnolol, honchiol, beta-glutamate, and bornyl acetate, and all of them possess anxiolytic properties. And to test this, what they did is they took bovine adrenal cells, and as a stressor, they added potassium to it to depolarize the membrane, and then they counted the amount of catecholamine or glucocorticoid production. Then one by one, they added one of the four ingredients of the magnolia onto it, and then they again counted how much there was a reduction of the glucocorticoids. All four ingredients inhibited it, but honchiol and bornyl acetate produced the largest amount of inhibition. It's the two main ingredients, honchiol and magnolia, are also shown to inhibit acetylcholinesterase. Therefore, we increase the amount of acetylcholine in the body or in the brain and help with memory and learning. Really exciting thing, though, is that these two ingredients also exhibit neurotropic effects in vitro. So basically, how we saw with the decreased methylation, it can affect brain-derived nerve factor. And brain-derived nerve factor, again, is what goes up and mops up and rejuvenates and repairs damaged and inflamed neurons. And magnolia can reset the amount of damage that's been downgraded by that methylation. So this is also really exciting for post-stroke, post-concussive disorders, etc. Magnolia also decreases the release of cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline from the adrenals. One thing, though, to just be cautious with is that in the patient who has a low DHEA, magnolia will also increase the DHEA, which is generally a very good thing. But just a little precaution, because we know that DHEA breaks down into estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and we can't specifically say, I'd like a 33-33-33 split. You just need to be careful, keep track of where the DHEA levels go to, and certainly where the estrogen and testosterone in female and male patients, particularly if there's a family or personal history of cancer there. GABA. With the GABA receptor, we certainly saw the calming effect on it. But GABA as a supplement also has a really interesting effect. It has both a stress inhibitory and a stress excitatory effect in different areas in the brain. It has a stress inhibitory effect in the posterior amygdala, which decreases feelings of fear and heightened emotion. And it also has an inhibitory effect in the hypothalamus, suppressing the glucocorticoid production. But yet it has a stress excitatory effect in the medial and cortical amygdala area. And this is the area that moderates the major input and output information, balancing and integrating the different emotions and different activities that happen during the day. And this particularly happens while we sleep, and specifically in stage 4 sleep. So while we're in stage 4, the amygdala gets busy and starts taking everything that happened during the day and prioritizing it, letting go of what we don't need to hold on to, keeping what we do need to hold on to. And that's why they always say sleep on it, everything seems better in the morning, and with good amygdala integration, it certainly will. Cortisol, unfortunately, inhibits amygdala integration, which is why we're going to need the GABA to support that. It's also another reason why sleep deprivation is such a powerful torture tool, because when you're not allowed, when your amygdala isn't integrating each night, everything gets bigger and bigger and bigger the next day. And certainly, again, you'll probably hear those similar complaints, not quite sleep torture, but how everything just seems so much bigger with our patients day after day. GABA has also been shown to increase alpha brain activity, alpha wave activity, just like the C9, but it also reduces beta waves. So it will not just convert, or not just increase the alpha waves, but actually convert the beta into alpha. So we get that, stop that non-stop chatter in the background. And the other thing that GABA does is it has a huge effect on growth hormone. And an overstimulated HPA axis will greatly inhibit the production of growth hormone. And growth hormone, as we know, has a huge impact on exercise, recovery, sleep, and fat burning itself. And what growth hormone has been shown to do is stimulate the production of both immunoreactive growth hormone and immunofunctional growth hormone, both at rest and during exercise. Immunoreactive growth hormone is all the types of growth hormone that are biologically active, meaning abundant in receptors that are both active and inactive. The immunofunctional pertains to only those that are active or functional growth hormone molecules, so really that's the more important of the two. And studies have shown that supplementation of only 750 milligrams of GABA a day have been shown to increase immunoreactive growth hormone by 18-fold during exercise and 15-fold at rest compared to a placebo, and that's just within 60 minutes of ingestion, and it increases immunofunctional growth hormone by 19-fold and 15-fold respectively. So again, it's a really powerful tool that we can use to help increase fat burning just by moderating the brain. Fructoxanthin. This is an extract from brown algae, not the blue or the green algae that we're so used to. And it increases the activity of uncoupled protein 1. And this is uncoupled protein 1 is also known as thermogen. And it's found in the mitochondria of the bat, or the brown adipose tissue. And it's stimulated by fatty acids, and it's also stimulated by this brown algae. And what it does is it begins a cascade of metabolic alterations that ends in mitochondrial oxidation of the fatty acids and therefore the weight loss. It also inhibits glycerol 3-phosphate dehydrogenase activity, which is the major route of electron transport activity in both carbohydrate and fat metabolism. And finally, it decreases PPAR, which is peroxisome proliferated activated receptor. But here it's specifically the gamma type. And the gamma-2 subtype is a type that exists only in the adipose tissue. So here it reduces lipogenesis greatly. Punific acids, these are pomegranate seed oil extracts, and they inhibit delta-9 desaturase, which is the key enzyme in fat metabolism. They're also used to produce oleic acid from stearic acid. They also lower triglycerides. And they actually have a more powerful effect at protecting muscle during weight loss programs and exercise programs than the traditional omega-6 fatty acids do. And that great study taking the combination of these two ingredients was done over 16 weeks, and one of the groups just took the fructoxanthin and the punific acids, and one did that plus a diet. And the diet was, the control group was just a diet, and the other group was diet plus supplement. And the diet was 1,800 calories a day, 50% of it was carbs, 30% was protein, and 20% was fat. After the 16 weeks, the xanthogen group, which is the group that took the product with the diet, lost 15.8 pounds, whereas the control group, the group that just did the diet, lost only 3 pounds. They also saw a 40% reduction in the white adipose tissue, lower fasting blood sugar levels, lower triglycerides, improved liver enzymes and blood pressure, and an increased REE compared to the control group. So once again, a huge difference in diet when we start playing around with the chemical messaging systems. Carnosine. This is an amino acid which regulates histamine in the brain. It's used to lower neuropeptide and increase leptin sensitivity to the hypothalamus so that we can initiate that fat-burning process and turn off those midnight munchies. 500 milligrams twice a day with this on an empty stomach, and really helps to, also this is one that's a great new anti-aging. It helps to decrease the onset of age-related neurological disorders, and it also stops the caramelization or the addition of sugar onto collagen molecules, and no adverse side effects. Glutamine, another amino acid, which is great for reducing sweet cravings. This is a really great one that if you have your patients open up their capsules and mix it in water, swish it in their mouth for 30 seconds, and then swallow, what it does is it interacts with the taste receptors on the tongue and inhibits the message up to the brain, specifically into the hypothalamus that says, I want more of this sweet. So they can do this on an as-needed basis for sweet cravings to keep them away from those treats. Glutamine, as we also know, improves muscle and bowel repair. So usually about 500 milligrams in a loose powder enough is all that we need to do this trick. Tyrosine, another amino acid. This is a primary protein or amino acid that's needed to make dopamine, so it can help decrease those fatty food cravings. It's also the primary protein needed to make the thyroid hormones or convert more readily the T4 into T3. And that doesn't matter whether the T4 is coming from levothyroxine or Synthroid or whether it's our own T4. Because we know in the stressed individual, when the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis is overridden, TSH also starts to rise out of the pituitary, which affects production of T4. But cortisol particularly inhibits the conversion of T4 into T3 and causes T4 to go into reverse T3 production. So we have somebody who, if we're only testing, T4, TSH levels, may look normal or low and normal for hypothyroid, but clinically could be completely hypothyroid. So tyrosine is a great converter back on there. 5-HTP. 5-HTP, as we know, is a precursor to serotonin. The body's going to take the tryptophan and convert it directly into 5-HTP and then into serotonin. This is great for improving moods. It's great for sleep, but mostly it's great for also decreasing the sweet cravings, particularly the chocolate. This is a really important one because we see a lot of people trying to use tryptophan to get at serotonin levels, and tryptophan can't cross the blood-brain barrier, but 5-HTP can. So if you overdose somebody or start increasing their tryptophan levels too much, just like we see the side effect when we're eating turkey, all they're going to do is get sleepy because a higher tryptophan level in the blood will cause sedation. When we have the 5-HTP, it readily crosses the blood-brain barrier and gets converted into serotonin right away. So this is a much easier route at that and much more effective. It is, though, as we do know, shouldn't be mixed with antidepressants. So I'm prescribing a diet pill. Can you supersize it? As we know, there isn't one cookie-cutter formula for everybody, and there's not one dose that's for everybody. So we do have to treat everybody individually here. Dietary treatment. What you eat and when you eat can completely retrain our body's hormonal axis, and that's the whole point. I never want to say to a patient, don't ever eat chocolate again, because God forbid if you say that to me, I'm running the other way. What we want to do is teach their body how to take the chocolate, to take all of the food that we're eating, not abnormally stored as food, fat, but use it as a fuel source, and then get back to living life. So how do we do that? We'll work for a low-calorie, all-natural, locally grown, gluten-free, whole food with minimal packaging. This is certainly, we don't have to go to just cardboard or plain lettuce to do this. That's a good part. Under normal hormonal conditions, 40% of our calories per meal is delivered to our liver, our muscle, and our blood as glycogen stores, and the remaining 60% is stored as fat. However, in the stressed individual, due to cortisol and all the changes we spoke about before, this gets redirected where we start storing 80 to 90% of our food as fat, and only 10 to 20% goes into glycogen stores. And again, this is independent of whether we eat one almond or an entire pizza. This split will take place when cortisol is there. And how our body decides what we need to do with our food is a complex cascade of messengers, as we've seen. The hypothalamus receives information from leptin at the end of the meal, and it either signals anorexigenesis, a message indicating, I'm not hungry, I've got enough fuel stored, so let's start burning energy now. Or it signals orexigenesis, saying, I'm hungry, I didn't eat enough, and I need to store more food for the future. Acute anorexigenesis increases muscle activity and initiates weight loss, while orexigenesis does the reverse. However, high insulin blocks leptin signaling, mimicking brain starvation and driving orexigenesis, so that we feel hungry again, crave more food, and eat again. Too much cortisol, or an abnormal cortisol response, as seen in chronic HPA stimulation, also inhibits leptin release and further increases insulin by threefold, once again increasing orexigenesis. To further complicate this, further complicated by the interaction with the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve connects afferent pathways from our intestines, stomach, liver, and pancreas to the brain. as well as the efferent pathways from the brain to the organs. Anorexigenesis turns off the vagus nerve, reducing our appetite, while the reverse again is true for orexigenesis, whereby the vagus nerve stimulates lipogenesis, tells the pancreas to secrete a lot more insulin. But when leptin's message is blocked from cortisol, the body thinks that it's starving, and the vagus nerve goes into overdrive, instructing the pancreas to hypersecrete insulin and therefore store more fat. So anything that calls upon insulin will encourage fat storage and propagate leptin inhibition, and so the cycle of weight gain goes around and around. And study after study reveals that frequent release of insulin blocks leptin and leads to leptin resistance. Leptin resistance, in turn, stimulates the vagus nerve to pump up insulin, leading to insulin resistance. And this is why insulin is considered the largest leptin antagonist and the largest contributor to fat. In the normal individual, where leptin and insulin are in balance, each hormone is released every single time we eat, again, whether it's one almond or a whole pizza. Together, they signal the end of the meal, and then leptin goes up to the brain, stimulates the energy-burning processes through the hypothalamus. However, because insulin is out and about for 3 hours every time we eat, our body is forced to use glycogen stores and only glycogen stores as a fuel source for the first 3 hours following the ingestion of any food. Again, it doesn't matter how many calories we eat. When insulin, our fat-storing hormone, is out, we cannot access adipose tissue. During this time, our metabolism is elevated by 8%. And this is where that whole theory of snacking or eating every 3 hours came from. It's very old school thinking, but what they thought was quick, at the end of the 3 hours, eat again and boost the metabolism back up. And yes, absolutely that's true, but we now know through updated research that for those first 3 hours, when we're only in glycogen stores, if we eat again at the 3 hours, we release leptin, we go back up to the hypothalamus, we initiate this whole process back over. So all we're doing is elevating that glycogen burning again for 3 hours at a rate of 8% and blocking all fat burning for the next 3 hours. And again, this is because when we eat, we release leptin and insulin, and we know where that leads to fat blocking and the weight gain. So it's very, very old school nutrition to believe that foraging all day long or snacking all day long is the way to keep your metabolism high in the stressed or non-stressed individual. Now, if you take somebody who's been eating McDonald's or high-fatty, high-sugary foods and you suddenly switch them to a really clean diet, it doesn't matter whether they're eating 3, 5, or 10 times a day. They're initially, they're going to lose weight. But then they're going to hit that plateau where they just can't get past it. And some of them, a lot of them, in fact, actually start increasing in their weight gain, independent of their diet staying the same. And we now know why. So what are we going to do about it? How do we stop this huge cycle of dietary failure? The government sends us a check. We failed so many diets, our kitchen qualifies as a disaster area. This is what we need to stop. So how do we retrain the body? Well, we start with the basics. We do a gram of protein for every kilogram of body weight divided through the 3 meals. We have unlimited vegetables and salads, the type of carbohydrates that both cortisol won't triple the release of insulin to, and the ones that are more nutritious have higher density nutrients. We have a temporary elimination or a large reduction in the grains or the starches just for 2 to 8 week period until we retrain the cortisol down. This is not because of Dr. Atkins. This is not because of glycemic index. This is because cortisol triples the release of insulin to these foods. So we need to get rid of that cortisol first. A max of 2 fruits a day, but generally you could substitute one of those for a grain if you needed to because the fruit is really treated like a grain anyways. And in fact now actually fructose, the sugar that's in fruit, has been shown to be worse for us and have a higher glycemic index than glucose. So really we want to take a look at the more whole grains. 1 glass of fabulous wine a day, simply from a social point of view. And this also can be interspersed for a fruit or a grain. But what you can't do with any of these things is have none Monday through Friday and have 5 of them on Friday night. Cheese and nuts and legumes, you can have them in moderation. These are ones that cortisol will not triple the release of insulin to. The main thing is, if you cheat, make it good and then get right back on track. Certainly what I see with people is cheating with silly little things like rice cakes in between meals. Make it good and get on with it. It's a new procedure. We can surgically implant tiny detour signs so it doesn't go to our thighs. This is certainly what we want to achieve here. Maintenance-wise, we want to take the exact same diet, but once we've retrained the cortisol, we can then increase the grains and the starches at each meal at a 1-to-1 ratio. You never want those foods, in addition with the fruits, to be larger in size than the proteins. We just want to get back to moderation, but we still need to keep it at 3 meals a day, 5 to 6 hours in between meals, no snacking. But you can have fluids. Relaxation techniques, stress management techniques, certainly these are key. And what works for each person here is different. Some people it's running, some people it's yoga, some people it's acupuncture, some people it's meditation. I'm learning how to relax, doctor. I want to relax better and faster. I want to be on the cutting edge of relaxation. If your stress management is stressing you out, it's certainly not going to work. This is my relaxation tape. It's the sound of the ocean waves crashing onto the shore, snatching my boss's body off his beach chair and carrying him out to sea. Whatever works for each individual is what works for them. Just going to go through quickly a couple of case studies. One is a 44-year-old woman. She presented with abdominal weight gain. It was 19 pounds, and the weight actually started when she started training for a marathon. So despite the fact that she was burning a lot of calories training, she was increasing weight. Her sleep also was disturbed. She would wake at 3:05, and it was literally 3:05 every night, and her fasting glucose increased to 5.9. Her blood pressure also rose, as did her morning resting heart rate. So what we did with her here was put her on Serenityn Plus, 2 BID, and the Xanthitrim, which is the penicic acid and the oleic acids together, and we did that for 2 BID as well for 4 weeks. She had lost 2 pounds per week despite not changing her diet at all. Her diet was perfect and her exercise. She had a large reduction in abdominal weight starting at week 4. At the end of the 8 weeks, she lost 24 pounds, so she actually lost more than she had gained, and her fasting glucose had dropped to 4.4. Both blood pressure and heart rate returned to normal. Next case study was a 52-year-old male who had lost his job 6 months prior. 2 months after that, he increased his weight by 14 pounds. His hemoglobin A1C went up to 0.067, and his LDL production rose to 4.1. And all of this occurred without, again, he didn't make any change to his diet or exercise. It was simply the stressors here. He also experienced a lot of racing thoughts and depressive episodes that were getting worse, and that was actually what drove him into my office there. We used Brain Calm, which is, has the passion flower added to it with the GABA, with Veratrol, which is the extract from red wine, which increases PGC1 alpha, Serenityn Plus, and we increased the protein, had no snacks, kept him on 2 fruits a day and some grains, just equal portions. So basically put him into a moderate diet, which is no snacks. And 1 month later, he had 12 pounds off and reported feeling emotionally much more balanced. And 2 months later, his hemoglobin A1C was back down to normal. LDL was 2.9, and he had dropped 19 pounds. Next case study was a 16-year-old female. Her parents had recently got divorced, and she had to move across town, so move schools, move away from her friends, because she went to live with her mother. She reported feeling really overwhelmed and distant, and she had put on 13 pounds in the first few months of school. Despite improving her diet, she on her own had cut out most things. She was eating mostly lean proteins and vegetables and fruits, but she was eating 5 to 6 times a day. After switching her to just the 3 meals a day, putting her on the Serenityn Plus and 5-HTP, her mood stabilized and she lost 16 pounds in 8 weeks. So again, you can see here, just by moderating the stress levels and the timing of the food, the great impact. I actually didn't change the type of food that she used there, as with the other people. Next one was a 44-year-old female. She had moved from the UK 8 years ago, and she gained 37 pounds. 25 of it was within the first year. She had frequent lightheadedness on standing. She slept 9 hours a night but never felt rested, and she had severe bloating. She was diagnosed with gluten intolerance a year before coming into my office, and she dropped 12 pounds really quickly and reduced a lot of the bloating just by getting rid of the gluten. But the rest of the symptoms had remained the same, and she couldn't get rid of the last bit of weight. We put her on Adrena Plus, 1 twice a day, Serenityn Plus, 2 twice a day, melatonin, 3 milligrams before bed, put her on protein at each meal, keeping moderate grains and starches and fruits, but no snacking at all. 1 month later, she had dropped 11 pounds. She was waking rested, improved energy, no lightheadedness. 3 months later, she had 35 pounds off, and all of her symptoms were resolved. Next one was a 32-year-old female with newly onset type 2 diabetes who was put on metformin. And she said she had 60 pounds that she couldn't lose despite a diet that was high in protein, vegetables, nuts, and legumes, minimal fruits, and little to no grains, starches, or sweets. But she was eating every 3 hours. Her mother had died of cancer 9 months prior, and she now looked after her father. She had problems falling asleep, and she would wake at 3:33. Hers actually varied from 3:33 to about 3:45. But usually you'll see it almost down to the minute. And she would wake in the night with anxiety and palpitations. So here we used orthoglucose, 2-BID, Serenitrin Plus, 2-BID, Sedatal Plus, natural sleep aid, one in the middle of the night if she woke up. And the beauty of Sedatal Plus, I found at this dose, is as long as you give the person 3 to 4 hours between taking that one single capsule, they will not wake groggy. So it helps to retrain the brain back over as well. Kept her on the exact same diet, but moved her to only 3 meals a day. And 3 months later, she was off for metformin. Fasting glucose was normalized, as was hemoglobin A1C, and 33 pounds off and sleeping through the night. And very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, last case study, 38-year-old female started a new job. She was working 10 to 12 hours a day. She maintained a really healthy diet, exercised 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But she only slept 6.5 hours a night during the week and 8 hours a night on the weekends when she could. She had gained 10 pounds in 6 weeks on her new job and 18 pounds in 3 months. All we did here was the Serenitrin Plus, 2 caps BID, melatonin, time-released, and 500 milligrams of carnosine so that we could retrain her leptin. 2 months later, she had dropped the 16 pounds. She was sleeping 8 hours a night, 5 days a week, and she even did this by decreasing her workout load. So again, we see less exercise, moderate food, changing the brain chemistry, and that's where we get the big impact on the weight. Really like to thank Douglas Laboratories and Pure Encapsulation, one, for providing us with amazing products, but two, for this opportunity to share this information with you. And I know that we're sort of tight for time, but I do welcome any questions that may come in.
Thank you, Dr. Penny. That was an incredible presentation with lots of science and great takeaways to apply to patient care. There are a couple questions. One I can address right off the get-go. Yes, Serenitrin Plus is available through Douglas Laboratories, so we're pleased to be able to offer that. And another question, Dr. Penny, if you could answer is, if somebody has a milk allergy, is there any issue with them taking Serenitrin Plus?
Really good question. Get asked this all the time by my patients, and I'm so pleased to say absolutely not. There's no, unless they have a pure casein allergy, but even then, it's a decapeptide. It's not a complete protein sequence. It's only a partial protein sequence. So I've even tested my patients on it, their blood work, and counted the IgG production who have casein allergies, and they've never reacted. It's completely lactose-free. So as to date so far, I have not had one individual with an allergenic response to it.
Okay, thank you. Does an individual over time develop any tolerance to the recommendations requiring more supplements, or do they lose any effectiveness?
With a lot of the supplements that just mop up cortisol, like a magnolia flower on its own or rhodiola on its own, you do develop a tolerance to it. You don't with the Serenitrin Plus because it's working by resetting the HPA axis. What you find is that the patients not only feel great on it, but very soon when you're testing their orthostatic blood pressure levels and you're keeping a look on their salivary and blood cortisol levels, you see them coming down. And as soon as their orthostatic BP gets to just plus 10, meaning the central nervous system has regulated itself, they can actually come off the Serenitrin Plus and the HPA axis stays maintained, meaning they live all day long in parasympathetic. They go into sympathetic when there's a stressor, but they go back to parasympathetic afterwards. So there's zero tolerance because we're actually fixing the problem, and then we can take them off the product.
Okay, thank you. Are you doing any neurotransmitter testing in your practice?
Only when it's indicated. If I can't get what I need through the basic in-office testing, again, the orthostatic BP being the most effective because it tells us what the HPA axis has been doing for the last 6 months, combining that with their symptoms and some blood work, I'll only go to the neurotransmitter testing if I need to, mostly because of expense. I'd rather the patients put it into product or into something else that's fun for stress management.
Well, I think that's encouraging that relying on some of the clinical testing right in office versus having to go to labs is just as effective, and you use that, rely on that a little more. So
it's huge, and patients appreciate it.
Sure,
because they're getting an answer right then and there, and it's also saving them, up to $700.
Another question I think would be worth to review, because it's come up a couple of times, and we only have a few minutes, so I don't know if you can just sort of capture this quickly. The slide that reviewed what happens when you're snacking between a meal, why that's a negative thing.
Absolutely.
Can you just review that, what happens in the body
when
snacking between a meal?
When we first eat, and it doesn't matter, again, whether it's one almond or an entire meal, our fat cells open up. And in the normal person, they'll fill up, the fat cells will fill up 60%, and then they close over. And then the rest of 40% of the calories goes to glycogen stores, so liver, blood, and muscle. As soon as that fat cell closes over, it releases leptin. Leptin goes up to the hypothalamus and says, great, I'm done, I'm satisfied. Turn off my hunger, turn off my food cravings. Now let's go into fat-burning mode. When we initiate fat-burning mode, we have to use up glycogen stores first, and that's a 3-hour cycle. It's kind of like a dishwasher. If I put one dish in, or if I put 30 dishes in the dishwasher and I press go, it goes for the same amount of time. If I eat 1 calorie or 30 calories, as soon as leptin hits my brain, it goes, okay, glycogen stores for 3 hours. While we're in burning through glycogen stores, our metabolism is elevated by 8%. And that was where that theory was, okay, quick, at the end of the 3 hours, eat again, boost the metabolism up 8%. But we now know through research that when we do eat again, we are only restarting the glycogen storing burning process for the next 3 hours. Yes, it's going to remain at an elevated 8%, but we just blocked all fat burning for the next 3 hours because we can't be in glycogen and adipose burning at the same time. And whenever leptin and insulin are out together, which they both are every time we eat, we can only be in glycogen stores for the first 3 hours after we eat. After that, we switch from one part of our metabolism into another, and that's where we burn adipose tissue and only adipose tissue at a rate of 92%. If cortisol is around, that rate drops from 92 down to 35%. So let's say we had breakfast at 6. We've been at 9, that's when we can switch into adipose burning or fat burning. If somebody has a small snack, a handful of almonds and apple, something that might be extremely nutritious, you open up the fat cells again, you close them, you release leptin, you restart that whole glycogen burning. So now you can't access your fat until noon, at which point is lunch. Then you do the same thing at the 3 o'clock snack, then you do the same thing at dinner. So the only time they're allowing their bodies to get into fat-burning mode is overnight.
Thank you. That was
a
good recap, and I think it's a challenge for people to sort of rethink what we've been taught, and you just did a great explanation as to why the 3 meals versus several small meals throughout the day makes sense in weight loss application. So I think this brings us to a close regarding the questions. I would like to remind everybody that this has been recorded and will be available on the Douglas Laboratories website, so that's www.douglaslabs.ca. So please, if you would like to re-listen, take notes, revisit this presentation, it will be available. There was a fair amount of really excellent science and the protocols, so I would recommend to revisit, and you might find some of your questions that didn't get answered now addressed by rewatching the webinar. Again, I'd like to thank Dr. Penny Kendall-Reed. This was extremely informative. I think everybody probably